Welcome to the Sandwich Generation Survival Guide. I am your host, Candace Dellacona, and I am so excited to announce our guests today, Kass and Mike Lazerow. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having us.
having us.
We're here to talk today about your book that is available for pre-order called Shoveling Shit, A Love Story. But let's first talk, Kass and Mike, about who you are and what your origin story is.
All right. Well, I'm half of the Lazerow duo, Kass, and origin story is I've always been entrepreneurial since a very young age. I think the last person that I had lunch with outside of work was an elementary school friend who told me, she goes, "Remember when you used to sell barrettes at school and you made so much money?" And I hadn't even thought of that. So entrepreneurial from the beginning and a competitor, I would say, at heart, having played a lot of sports my whole life, and then a person who really likes to give back.
Yeah. And Mike?
Yeah, Cass and I grew up probably 10 miles from each other. Don't want to tell the dirty little secret. She's a little older than I am. She was friends with my older brother. It's just a chronological fact. It's not an opinion. We have nothing to do with it. And we reconnected at a wedding of a mutual friend and just hit it off over really early internet stuff. So I was running a business at the time in Web 1.0. She was very entrepreneurial, helping the largest law firms in the world build their first websites. And so we connected over ideas and innovation and the future of the internet. And Cass had come from an entrepreneurial family that no one really worked for other people. My dad was a builder and owned a home inspection business. My stepfather, who I actually grew up with, parents got divorced at 6 years old, and then I grew up with my mom and stepfather living with them. At least he had a money management firm, and my grandfather built apartments, low-income housing in Baltimore his whole life. And so I just had a bunch of role models who this is what they did. They did their own thing, which I think pushed me into that path of entrepreneurship.
For our listeners, Mike and Kass were the founders of Buddy Media and golf.com. So you have some pretty significant successes under your belt. But one of the things I loved so much about your book, Shoveling Shit, A Love Story, was you really got into the nitty gritty of being a founder and the process in which founders find themselves, the good and the bad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what brought you to write a book like this and why you saw the need?
So for the last, I would say 12 or 13 years since selling Buddy Media, we have been investors. And we've been doing that out of our own pocket, off our own balance sheet. And then we started in 2019 a venture firm. And so we've been investors and we love entrepreneurs. And we also spend a lot of our time giving back to the entrepreneurial community by taking calls, helping out. We get lots of, can you talk to this person? Can you help them? What do you think about this idea? And I'd always wanted to somehow get the message out in a more exponential way, if you will. And we had thought about doing a podcast. And then I said, Mike, I have all these lessons. I've kept them all. Let's write a book. Mike was a little hesitant and I scaffolded it all out. And he's like, holy crap, you actually did keep all of these lessons. And then it took 3 months and we did it. Takes a year to publish it. I don't know why that's the case. But our goal is to get it out to as many entrepreneurs as we can, just so that we can help.
Yeah, I love that. And it's one of the big themes and one of the things I loved about the book, and maybe Mike, you could talk about this, is the two voices, right? Where the reader goes through Kass's perspective and Mike's perspective. And I think that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, one of the hardest parts about writing this book is we did it together. And although we've worked together for over 25 years, we've been married for 25 years, but started a company while we were just dating. We really do different things. She's more of the operator. I'm more of the kind of salesperson, visionary, capital markets, fundraising, biz dev, stuff that doesn't matter as much as like, how do you run these companies? And so when we wrote the book, we were in it together. It was a creative exercise that we had to create and agree on stuff. So A little friction at the beginning. We did get into the flow, but the hardest thing to figure out was the voice, because although many people know us together, including our investors and employees and everyone in their life, we are two different people, obviously, and we have our own perspective. And there's certain stories which I was a part of, which she wasn't. So you can't write it in we, right? Like, we didn't do this if it was just me at our office in Singapore after we'd opened it telling a story, or at South by Southwest trying to sell our products. And so we landed on just being really clear with the reader. There are three voices. There's we, there's me, and there is she, Kass.
Yeah.
And so Kass had her me and the he and the we. And so we just kept it conversational and tried to do it as if we were sitting around talking to someone and not overcomplicate it. And I think we landed at a spot where, although at the beginning, you may have to focus a little on who is this talking, it very quickly becomes something that is natural.
Yeah, I totally agree. The theme of partnership is throughout the book. In fact, I think you even have a chapter called Picking Your Partner. Maybe talk to us about why picking your partner is so important and the best way to go about that.
Picking a partner is like picking a spouse. That's what we basically say is the analogy. You are going to wake up every morning and text this person, right? When you're running a company, you're going to go to bed texting them, and it's going to be a very close relationship. So you got to make sure that you have picked someone who has the same mission, values, work ethic, and you know the different responsibilities each of you is going to take, especially for co-founders. Then you have more than one other co-founder, and it's a big deal. And what we have found is the co-founder relationships that work have different expertise. So you're not overlapping in skill sets. And when we have seen companies where the two founders are both doing product or both engineers, it just doesn't work as well. There's a lot of micromanaging, there's a lot of paralysis by analysis, and it just doesn't work. It's very, very important that you pick the right partner.
Yeah.
Mike, what would you say?
I agree 100%. We, as investors, we didn't really think that much about this as entrepreneurs, because it never crossed our mind really to start other businesses with someone else until I did, and kind of failed miserably with one attempt. But as investors, we see the dynamic of co-founders getting in their own way. And so most of the time, it's not competition, it's not the market, it's not inability to find talent, it's internal struggle between founders, not being able to make decisions, not being on the same page. That's what gets in the way usually, especially early on for most startup companies. We didn't feel like we could write this book without really outlining what we think some of the best strategies are for agreeing to move forward with someone. What are the conversations you need to have? How should the skill set be different? So what is your lane? What is her lane or his lane? And we wrote this Shoveling Shit, a love story. Is not just our love story. It's a love story between entrepreneurs and the hard work and grit and the shoveling of shit that goes into these businesses. It's the misery of starting a business and working for yourself and the beauty that's in that. And it's this idea that it's the hardest thing you can do and it's the best thing you can do. So it's both miserable and awesome. And holding those two ideas is important if you're an entrepreneur, because the alternative is you could be unemployed or working for someone who's just telling you what to do. And so it's in this struggles where you find the purpose in your life as an entrepreneur. You could find it many other ways. I'm not saying it's the only way, but from a work perspective, it's a really good way to find your purpose, to be fired up every day, even though you know you're going to show up to work and just have to shovel shit all day. I was just talking this morning to a former buddy, what we call buddy media employee, who went on to start an incredible brand in the liquor space, bourbon company. And he read the book And it was just like, it was my book, because I always say I show up and I'm just shoveling shit, right? And so if you're just showing up to work and you're just mailing it in, you may not recognize it, but you're running your business, right? Like, we've worked together and you are running a business. You have clients,
Yeah.
you have to deliver.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just these entrepreneurs who start, but it's 5.5 million people who started businesses last year. They look more like restaurants, service companies, hair salons, wellness centers. I think what we did in tech was a very specific thing. We tried not to write a book that was for the tech community. It's really for all entrepreneurs, and we think we've accomplished that.
You have, and you said a lot there, Mike, but what I was thinking about when I was reading the book is that it really is a blueprint for partnerships overall. It's almost agnostic in the sense that, to Cass's point, picking a partner is similar to a marriage. And as sandwich generation members, which I think I can safely say the three of us are, and surviving, I think being in it and seeing the beauty and shoveling the shit at the same time, they will exist side by side, right? And trying to find those moments that are really great and pulling through when it's not so great.
That's 100%.
When it comes to, you're talking about one of your 4-part approaches, Cass pointed out that she kept all of the lessons over the last couple of decades as a founder and helping other founders, the vision, communication, mindset, and workload approach, and how universal that can be across the board, whether you're a founder or you're a spouse in a marriage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mike, you want to take it?
No, you take it first, because I think this is an area that you really thrive.
You have to have this. I want to make sure I'm answering the question right. So there's like a growth mindset that you have to have as an entrepreneur and a beginner mindset, right? And I think it doesn't matter if you're approaching a business, what you're doing as a daily task, or if it's any kind of relationship. It's the idea that you've got to focus and prioritize. And you've got to understand that, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you're going from 0 to 1, what do you need to do to survive? And what is that kind of focus? There should be nothing else on your plate. And in order to do that, you create financials, you create a budget, you basically put what you think is going to happen on the back of a napkin, right? Whatever you come up with in the first year of your financials, that's never going to be what you end with. But you are trying to prove that, and you're trying to come up with success measurements, and you're going to use that to gauge your success. So the idea of having the correct operational mindset, that as an entrepreneur, there's nothing more that you can do than focus for that first year.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about entrepreneurship is there's so much talk about this hustle culture. And I think what we're trying to say is that, yes, you have to work hard, but hard work alone won't get you there. It's not about just whoever works harder wins. It's hard work is table stakes. And what we've tried to do is outline very specifically all of the lessons we wish that we had known when we started out that is going to be game changers. The book is one part of it, obviously. When you buy it, you get a toolkit, the Entrepreneurial Toolkit, which is everything we use to launch these businesses. It's the Go Gauge to test if the idea is viable. It's a budgeting system to, even if you're not a finance person, to put your ideas onto paper and see if the budget makes sense just back of a napkin. It's strategic frameworks for how to focus an organization. I think when Kass said earlier that she wants to get her ideas out in kind of an exponential format, we want to help entrepreneurs in a world that a lot of the jobs that we had access to growing up just don't exist.
True.
And I don't know if you would recommend someone go to law school to then try to become an associate and then a junior partner, then a partner, and then an equity partner, because a lot of those jobs just don't exist, right? And I'm not even talking about Harvey.ai and what that's going to do to that business. I'm just talking about like the current environment where there isn't the fat that we used to have in the ad agency business, the law firm business. So everyone's an entrepreneur when you start out. So you got to sell yourself. That's product number one, right? And we think that there's some strategies that will help you focus and do that better, whether you want to be a billionaire or you just want to land somewhere where you can do great work.
You're right. There's a methodology here. And that's one of the things that you pointed out in the book, that it's certainly not going to lead you to success 100% of the time, but it sets the framework
Yeah.
to hopefully set you up for success. So the concept of your go gauge, I would love for you guys to talk more about that, and maybe from Cass's perspective as the operational person and documenting all of it, and then maybe how you see it differently and what happens when you disagree, when a founder comes to you and they say, we would love for you to invest, and you go through the go gauge. Have you ever been in a position where Cass sees it one way and Mike sees it another?
Let me answer the back half of that question. When we have a pitch or a proposal coming to us,
Yeah.
Mike and I develop that go gauge and that framework to answer all these questions, like what is the product? How is it different than anything out there? What's the audience size? How are you going to get it to that audience? All that kind of stuff. If you go through that and we can actually get answers to that, that's the first part. Not every founder actually can answer those questions. That's what we found. When it comes to making the decision, and Mike's looked it over all of the financials and maybe it makes sense. Let's say we get to that part and now they've crossed two hurdles. They've answered the questions, they had done the financials, and for the most part, the financials make sense. Then it's about the aspect of people and leadership. Has this founder or founders, do they know what they don't know? That's what I'm looking for. So as the operator and the person that really looks at people and scaling teams, and can we get them to a place where they understand how to focus, I'm trying to find the humble co-founder or co-founders that say, look, I'm not going to know everything, but I'm going to hire the right people around me. So that's the answer. The second part. Mike, do you want to answer the first part?
Yeah, specifically the go gauge and all of the tools and strategies we put out there. It's not about if you do this, you will succeed. It's this will help you make fewer mistakes. And the biggest issue you have as an entrepreneur, both starting out and growing the business, is fear, and fear that's driven by the massive amount of uncertainty that you have. I compare it to someone who's just walking around a dark room trying to find the door, the handle to get out into some light. You bang your head, you trip over stuff, you're just lost. But you know, on the other side of this door is some light, and you could find a bathroom and something to eat, and you could go on and live. And so we're trying to expose some strategies and tools that help us get there. And so we talked about co-founders. One of the other biggest mistakes we see is greenlighting ideas that either shouldn't be greenlit or don't support the life that you want to live. And so specifically with the go gauge, it's a very simple, we didn't go to business schools. There's a very simple kind of outline or checklist, if you want, that basically will help you make that decision. It all starts with what is the product? Why is it better than existing options? Because you want something that's better. Who's the customer? And when I say who's the customer, who's going to buy it and how many of them are there? So it's not just, oh, the golf industry is $80 billion. It's okay. I don't own a golf course. So I got to take out that revenue. I don't own this. The people who you're targeting, what's a real size? And then what a lot of entrepreneurs don't really focus on is how will customers find out about your product, which is the fourth, sales and marketing. And then the delivery channel, which is really important these days. How will you get it to customers, retail, e-commerce, what's the model? And that all kind of culminates in a simple question like, does the financial model pass the smell test? And so if you can focus up front on answering these questions, what happens is you'll still probably fail and have to pivot.
Yeah.
But if you don't focus on them, there's a good chance that you're definitely going to fail.
It makes sense. How do you deal with failure? How do you pivot? And what are your examples of maybe realizing that you're through the process and it's just not working? And from your perspective, Cass, is there a red flag where you realize, look, it's time to get out and it's not exactly what we thought?
I think When it comes to business models, like Mike said, whatever you start with isn't going to be what you end with.
Right.
So I think entrepreneurs have to go into their companies realizing, okay, the first year is about survival. If I can get from 0 to 1 and prove that the success metrics that I wrote down in this back of the napkin financials, then I can move forward. And you're going to have to pivot. I can't even name a company who started off as the same thing that they ended up with, if you think of any company. So the gut has to be there, right? You have to listen to your gut. And as Mike often says, it's this nagging thing that you start to hear, and then you start to try to convince yourself
Yeah.
that it's still working. And what I see from my vantage point is when you're in a company or we have investments and they're not pivoting, it's ego, right? So ego has gotten in the way, and the ego has gotten in the way because of fear. And the fear and the uncertainty of, oh my gosh, I sold investors on this idea, or my spouse knows this is what I've been telling this is my identity around this idea. And you have to admit that it was wrong, right? That there are no customers, or there's too much competition and my product isn't differentiated. So when you see and start to feel something, you're usually right. There's, as Mike always says to me, when's the last time you said, oh, my gut was wrong? It's usually the opposite.
Yeah. What I'll also say too is that when you're balancing these two concepts where you're like all in, and so you have to be all in, but then you also have to have the necessary distance to be able to do just what you said.
That's why you write down the financials, even if they're simple, because those become the success measurements.
Yeah.
And a lot of entrepreneurs decide, okay, I'll answer all of Mike's questions. And then we've got the financials. And then they try to tell us, oh, no, everything's going great. And we say, well, have you gone back to the financials? Because those are your measurements. That's what you basically told us you were going to do. And a lot of them don't go back and say, oh my gosh, I don't have 5 customers, or I don't have my first customer, or I didn't hire X, Y, and Z people on the team.
Yeah.
So that's like the formula for success in the first year.
Totally makes sense. And then what about you're imparting all these lessons to the founders, and then let's go back and delve into the family life piece and what work-life balance looks like when you're a founder and a parent. You guys have kids. And how did that look for you? And maybe what would you do differently when it comes to that, being parents and being all in and trying to be present?
I think Mike and I, at least this last company, Buddy Media, we did a really good job at communicating that we were going to be all in, and we're coming from one family. So we had all of our eggs in one basket. So there was no parachute. There was nobody else providing an income. But we acknowledged that we were going to sacrifice the kids when they were little, meaning we were not going to be around as much as we should have been. At least that's, you can hear my guilt there, should have been.
Yeah.
And that if we could get back to them when they were older, you know the drill, Candace, big kids, big problems, younger kids, smaller problems. So that was definitely it. But there is no balance. I know you know this. There is zero balance. You can only do one thing well at a time. And as an entrepreneur, you have to be all in.
Yeah.
So there's massive sacrifices. I didn't know anyone at the school that my kids went to.
Sure.
I never made friends so that you went on little trips or spent the President's Day weekend going skiing with them. We were barely keeping our head above water.
Yeah.
So the concept is, and what I would have done differently is I would have been kinder to myself. I would have said, oh my gosh, they are going to be okay. It takes a village. There are people around them. We had wonderful babysitters, absolutely wonderful babysitters. One of whom is Jessica, and she just was wonderful, and she would just love them so much, and
Yeah.
they will be okay as a
Yeah.
result.
And what about you, Mike? How do you see it in terms of being a dad and the all in? Because Cass and I share that feeling of the mom guilt, which I think was maybe not so fair to the dads, but I'm interested to see what your perspective is on that.
The mom guilt is real, and it's much different than dad's. It's always been much easier for me to just disappear. I like a certain band. I'll go to a 4-night stand. I was just in Mexico seeing them, and it's easy for me to turn off my head and get away. It's harder in general for Cass and
Yeah.
for a lot of our friends who are moms.
Yeah.
And it's probably a good thing, just evolutionary. So we were in Africa over the holidays, and some of the most successful species are women led, right? Which I
Sure.
think we are. So you look at elephants, you look at some of the, let's just say, the animals who aren't getting eaten every day in the jungle and on the plains,
Yeah.
like they're very strong matriarchies. And I think part of that is you need someone to worry about the health of the family. In that case, survival. I wouldn't want to be an impala. Everyone seems to eat impalas. We're just going to have a lot of babies, and then whatever happens, happens. Where there's nurturing of elephants by the mothers. And for me, I didn't think about it as much at the time. I was also on the road a lot more. So I did sales and business development, casted a lot of the marketing. And there's nothing harder than being at home with the kids when they're young. We had very young kids. We had kids all around every company we launched. And so it was like, we'd go to work and then we would take care of the family. That was life for a long time.
Yeah.
Which is why we're so excited to be empty nesters in the fall. We love our kids, but come on, 23 years later,
It's
like
enough, right? It's
we got
enough.
shit we got to do.
I'm with you, Mike.
And so I'm just being honest. I didn't think about it as much.
Yeah.
And we were fully in it together with a shared life, even though Cass bore a lot more. For example, I didn't know when the dentist appointments were, doctor's appointments. So Cass is managing hundreds of employees, keeping everything straight, quarterly meetings, board meetings. And she has these 3 dependents who act like board members who have to be driven everywhere. And you got to keep the schedule.
Little CEOs, I
I
call
don't
them.
really know
Well,
how
and
Cass
yeah,
did it.
Cass still had to sign the permission slips.
Funny you say that, Candace. So the other day I had an entrepreneur mom say to me, I'm overwhelmed on this. And I'm trying to help her understand that she doesn't have to be perfect with what she does at home and everything's going to be okay. And she starts talking about permission slips. The school won't stop sending multiple emails. She has multiple kids at the same school. She's getting 4 sets of emails. It's like crazy town. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't remember ever signing anything. I literally have no memory of signing anything. I remember when we got to 2012 and our last 2 kids got into a different school. And I said, okay, Mike, this is first day. It's lower school. We got to get them to school. He's like, okay, great. And we sat in assembly and the lower school was like, okay, now find your teacher with the flag that she's holding up or he's holding up and then drop your kids off. And I looked at Mike and Mike looks at me. He goes, do you know? And I'm like, I don't know. He's, did you read the email? I'm like, I didn't read the email. So we were the only parents going around saying, Lazarow's here.
Right.
Lazarow's here.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard. The mental load, especially on mompreneurs, as I
Yes.
call them,
Yeah.
is massive
Yeah.
because 99% of the time we are the default parent. And that means that we're carrying the mental load. And then when you're at a company and you're trying to be a founder, it's 2 or 3 times more work.
For sure. Not to take anything away from you, Mike, but I obviously agree with you, Cass, and I think I'm there with you. I also think, though, that having a good partner and recognizing what each of you are good at and
Yeah.
forgiving each other, where you have, as a co-founder with Mike, you had an inside bird's eye view of what he was doing
Yes.
because you were
Which
involved.
helped.
Yeah,
Which
for sure.
really helped.
Of
Yes,
course.
because I think that's what Mike refers to as our shared life. There was no resentment. It wasn't like I would do it much harder. And it was harder when Mike had his earnout at Salesforce and I came back and I was with the kids for many years, not working. And that was harder because I didn't know what was going on. And I felt resentment that I was doing everything. But being co-founders together,
Yeah.
again, goes back to picking the right partner. I could see that he wasn't just working and going on boondoggles and stuff. We were in this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
he
no.
did go to fish boondoggles. Let me just say that. He's always done that. But
Well, the last thing I was thinking of when I was reading your book, and I mentioned this briefly to you, Cass, is that you brought up your dad and the concept of modeling when it comes to being a founder and advising other founders and even with parenting. So your kids saw you working so hard, both of you, going all in, committing, really being just devoted to the idea and the success. How do you think modeling for your kids and other founders is the key? So when other founders pick up this book, really that's
Right.
what you've done.
So I think it's everything. And I'll take the first part of it and say, in a company, that leaders have to shovel first, right? We have a whole chapter on that. There's nothing that I would ask of someone else that I wouldn't do or I haven't done with them. So it doesn't matter. So that's the mindset that you have to get through your head as an entrepreneur, that there's no hierarchy. You might put a hierarchy, and I strongly suggest you don't inflate titles, but when you have this company, you have to think about every action, every word means something. And are you trying to build a positive culture, or are you just trying to be standoffish and being a king or a queen up here? And then when it comes to your kids, that's the same kind of mentality. My mom modeled that she always gave back to the communities and she volunteered a lot. So it's always been something that's very important to me. And that's why we brought it to our companies like Cycle for Survival. We've done that. This is our 17th year doing this. And it became a really big culture glue. I always think, though, Candace, are my kids paying attention? And
Yeah.
I can say to those parents who are like, oh my God, I'm modeling all this, but nothing seems to be working. I can give this one kind of glimmer of hope and example. I've always worked out. I was a tennis player in college, and my dad was big into lifting way before anybody lifted. And he really understood the idea of longevity and strength and things like that. So I always had. And then it's hard when you're a founder to find time to work out, but I strongly suggest it. So we work out 5 to 6 days a week. And I always wondered, would our kids see that and do it? Because you can't just say, you should work out, you should
Yeah.
work out.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it. All three of them work out.
That's a great example. What about you, Mike? What do you see the modeling?
The only way, especially at home, but I think it's the same with work. When I tell my kids to do something or I tell them a lesson, they want to do the opposite. It does nothing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, be a good person or care about others. But when we model it, it sinks in because they see it over a long period of time.
Yeah.
It's not empty words. And so I love the workout analogy that Cass just talked about, but it goes into everything from, is it a surprise that one of our kids is launching a company right now? The work we've done in philanthropy has definitely impacted. We've been long involved with Cycle for Survival for 17, 18 years. And we have a daughter now who only thing she wants to do is cancer research and worked in an MSK leukemia lab last summer and will be pursuing biology and neuroscience in college starting in the fall.
Amazing.
Your actions really matter. And we know that on the downside. So kids are born good,
Yeah.
but they can get turned around by parents who are abusive and just aren't there, don't put up the boundaries, just are absent. It's also true on the upside. So our relationship to friends, to family.
Yeah.
Like, if we want
You treat people.
we want them to be close with us, we should treat our parents respectfully. And it's not always easy.
Yeah.
If you've met my mom, who hopefully is not listening. Nancy. And
Man
so,
means well.
listen, we have a great relationship and we hope that is a model for the future. I think
Great.
in a company, we got to hundreds of employees, we set the tone. People weren't necessarily seeing us every day, but that's why we use Cycle for Survival, quarterly meetings, giving back, making doing good and doing well a key part of our ethos. And like any organization, you have symbols and rituals and stuff that you care about, values, and you have to be very proactive about it, because if you're not, you see what happened with companies that don't focus on it.
Absolutely.
And you have to be consistent. I think the other part, Candace, either personally or professionally, is that everything you do has to be consistent.
Sure.
Right.
I think that at the end of the day, both of you have done such a good job at that with this book and the way that you live your lives, the way that you've been founders of your own companies. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to speak with you today and obviously read the book. And I want to tell our listeners that it is available for pre-order, right, guys?
Yes, it is.
You can order, you have your own website. We're going to put all of the information in our comment section for the podcast, including Cycle for Survival, which I know is really important to both of you in honor of your friends. So thank you so much for spending time with me today and giving me the inside scoop on your success. And I wish you the best with the book.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And thank you
Appreciate
too
it.
for always having our back.
Yeah, my pleasure.